Well, hello again and welcome in. Wherever you are today and wherever you're listening from, I'm so happy to have you over to feast upon God's Word together. Get your plate ready today and take a seat. It's the 44, which is Matthew 4:4. Man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Let's eat. I'm still your host, Jed Yancey, and Happy New Year and welcome to 2025. And I'm hoping that all of you have had a wonderful holiday season, a happy new year. And here we go, right? Season 4 and episode 1 of the 44 is here. Technically, we just wrapped up our second full season as season 1 began about halfway through 2022. But anyways, before we start here, I just want to let you know that we down here in Ocala at Central are going to journey our way through reading the New Testament in 2025 as we are people of the book. We're going to read one chapter a day, 5 days a week, and we'd obviously love for those of you who would like to share in that with us to do just that. You can follow us on Facebook or on Instagram at Ocala Central. Where I'm going to post each day's readings as well as a question or something to consider for anyone to comment on. We've got some other things we're doing with it here in Ocala, but if you've never read through the New Testament, or maybe it's just been a minute since you have, why not let 2025 be the year that you do just that? As far as the 44 here in 2025, the plan is still to release every Friday around 4 a.m. so that it's ready to go for you early risers on Friday mornings. And we'll just continue to eat from God's Word on the weekly. And I always look forward to doing just that. And it excites me each week to prepare and then to sit here and to eat with you. So as we continue this conversation we started with last week, this rhythm in creation. I want to suggest that first off here, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, that maybe you start there before you listen in today. Might be a good time for you to pause, go back, listen to that, and then jump back in here with us for part 2. Because we talked some last week about how we've got this societal issue that we're faced with, this thing that has really become the cultural norm, and that is our lives being or full of this chronic restlessness. Like the way many of us live our lives is not present, is not restful, and is not following the rhythm or the beat that we see God in creation and something he commanded his people to do under the old covenant. Now, as I said last week, I'm not sitting here saying that we should keep the Sabbath day because we find under the new covenant that that's not really a command. It's not commanded to do so like it was under Old Testament law. In fact, Colossians 2 helps with this. In my mind, Acts 15 helps a little bit. So if you wanted to go there and you wanted to read and dig a little deeper, you can. But really, all we're after here and all we're eating on is just the idea that we just take like a little slice of that and maybe you do already this whole rest thing, and we try to apply it to our lives, like stopping and ceasing. But I think the other part of this that we need to understand is what we aren't talking about is, as we say or like to say nowadays, like I get a day off, which for most of us isn't really a day off. I mean, kind of is. You aren't going into work maybe when we say I have a day off, but for many of us, a day off is not a cease or a stop, because for a lot of us, that's our day to actually go and do more and more and more. As we run errands or we do yard work or we run around town or we go shopping or got to get groceries or have to go to another birthday party, like all good things. But remember the idea here and where we left off last week should be to cease or to stop, or dare I say Sabbath, to a point where it falls right in line with the result of following the rhythm of creation. And what was that result? We looked at last week from Exodus 31 that the result for God in his rest on that seventh day was refreshing and rejuvenation and life. So today I want us to move into Jesus. And I want us to look at him from the standpoint of saying, okay, well, if we're going to take on this chronic restlessness, then how did Jesus do it? How did he tap into the spirit of restfulness and find refreshing and rejuvenation in life? And what's more, which is where we'll start, what did Jesus have to say during his day and when he lived about the Sabbath? And the first thing that pops in my mind is in Mark chapter 2, there in verses 23 through about 28, where Jesus is questioned about the Sabbath, and Jesus and his disciples are walking through the grain fields on the Sabbath day, and they're picking the heads of grain, and hello trouble from the Pharisees, who start to lose their minds over them doing this and ask why these guys are doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath day. And so Jesus answers back, if you remember that story, by pointing back to David in 1 Samuel 21 and that occasion with him. But then down there in verse 27, it says this, which I think is super important with where we're going today, that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. These guys he's speaking to had clearly messed up the whole Sabbath thing. They had it backwards to begin with. And here's Jesus' reminder that, guys, listen, you've totally missed the mark yourselves in regards to this command to stop one day a week. These guys had taken this day to the ultimate extreme. And as many of you already know, these Pharisees had turned this thing that God had given and God had commanded into something else entirely by making the day more strict and making the day a whole lot more burdensome and making it a lot more work with many more rules than what God had actually commanded. Like, let's just label them the complete opposite of us, maybe, as it relates to the Sabbath, which, as I said last week, most of us don't even know what that is exactly and what that looks like. Not only do a lot of us not know what it is, but at no time do we ever actually have a day off or even time off to handle the very things that we would call burdensome. But you know what's even worse than all of that is that there was this day that was made for man to stop and to cease and to be injected with life and find times of refreshing and to build our relationship with God. All the things we know that we need that fit right into the rhythm of creation. And yet our approach is still to go, go, go and to work, work, work. Or in some really, really sad cases, say that not only is that 1 hour and 15-minute worship too long, but I don't even have time for that, which is one extreme. Or the other extreme that I can't even wake up to build that connection and build that relationship with God on a day that's set aside to do that very thing. Now, I'd rather not go that route today, that is talking through the importance of finding time of refreshing and finding life, injecting life into us through our worshiping of our Creator with other saints, except to maybe say this or have you consider this. How in the world do we have any kind of spiritual life or any kind of time of refreshing if I can't fit 1 hour of my week to worship and I can't make it fit my schedule or build that into my life? And if that's you, I can almost guarantee you that nothing else we talk about in today's episode as we look at the life of Jesus and how he tapped into a spirit of restfulness and refreshing, none of that will you have time for either. If that's you, I'll leave it at this. Resolve to make that change today, starting here in 2025. Now, as I intended, what I really want us to eat on today is to slide away from the word Sabbath and into Jesus, who we read as Lord of the Sabbath, and see how he tapped into that same beat and that same rhythm we're talking about, how he tapped into the spirit of restfulness and found refreshing in his daily life, which is an awesome study and one that we don't have nearly enough time to cover all the things. But there's this one piece of this that if I had to say, wow, like that's it. This is the slice of Sabbathing that can really help me and maybe help you. It is this Greek word eremos, which in the Greek is a word that we find over and over and over in our Bibles. Again, too many stories of Jesus and this Greek word connected together to share with you today. But your first question might be, okay, well, what is it? What does that word even mean? Well, it's a word with several different meanings, but all of them kind of mean the same. In some stories where this word appears with Jesus, it means desert. In some, it means a deserted place. In some, it meant wilderness. And in our language today, we might just say that this word means a quiet place, a secluded place, like going all the way back to episode 1 of the 44 and how this podcast got its name from Matthew 4:4 in that passage I read at the beginning of each week. What is the setting when Jesus says, man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God? Well, he's just been baptized and he's led by the Spirit out into the Eremos. And for 40 days of fasting and prayer, he's out there and he's tempted by Satan, which is super interesting because isn't it those moments where I haven't eaten and I'm tired and my life is go, 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 and there's a lot happening that Satan is going to come at me and come at me the hardest? Like he's so good at coming at me and tempting me when I'm at my worst. And so in that case, we would say, man, well, maybe this word is bad. This setting is bad. But what if maybe we got it all wrong? And this desolate, quiet wilderness of a place isn't the place of weakness, but yet through what we see in Jesus, it's actually the place of great strength. You see, if it were the place of weakness, or if it was a place that was bad or a place we shouldn't go to often, do you think Jesus would have gone there as much as he did? Because over and over and over again, we find him going right back to whatever Eremos described for him. Let me give you just two examples here today. Mark chapter 1. Mark recounts Jesus' first day on the job as Messiah, and he's all over the place. And he's up early teaching, and he dealt with a man with unclean spirit. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. And after the sun sets, there in verse 32, he's healing the ill and the demon possessed. And we are told the whole city was there. Now, it sounds like a lot of my days. Maybe sounds like a lot of your days. Not necessarily the healing part, but aren't a lot of our days like that? I go here and then I go there and I do this and I do that. The sun sets, still more to do, and a lot of people to give my attention to. But then here's this word, verse 35. In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and he left the house and he went away to a secluded place and was praying there. Now, you see, what I'm not suggesting here is that you too, or me too, go out and find a secluded place to pray or to get up before everyone and go out and do that. While that may be what you need to do and also a good thing to do, what I think we really need to eat on is this. Like after a day like that we see with Jesus, what are you accustomed to doing the very next morning? Well, typically it's anything other than finding my Eremos or going to my place. Like to find that time of refreshing and set myself back into the rhythm of creation of work, 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 stop, cease, rest. You see, in this case, we aren't talking over the course of a week and taking one full day, but taking time each day to inject some life back into you and your relationship with God. But you know what's even more crazy about this story is to not only see that with Jesus, but the difference between what Jesus does and where Jesus goes to find that refreshing and tap back into that rhythm of creation versus the way everyone else wakes up and what they do. In this story, We read that Simon Peter and his companions, they wake up, they're searching for Jesus, and they say, "Hey, come on, man. Everyone's looking for you." In essence, like, let's get back going. Let's jump right back into the go, go, go lifestyle, which sounds like me. From the second my eyes open in the morning and I get my wits about me, you can forget the quiet place. You can forget tapping into the rhythm of creation because it's go time. What an example of Jesus tapping into the rhythm of creation and that spirit of restfulness. But it's not just that example. Here's one more. In Mark 6, John the Baptist is beheaded. The apostles come and they report this to Jesus, as well as reporting to him all that they had done and all they taught from their sending out at the beginning of that chapter. And here we have again, these men went out two by two, teaching and preaching and healing and casting out demons. Go, 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 go. And by the time they reached Jesus to report in, they had to be wore out. And so this is what Jesus says to them in Mark 6 and verse 31. Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while. For there were many people coming and going, and listen to this part, they didn't even have time to eat. Now, how does that sound as it fits with your life? Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like your life sometimes? And if so, what do I do? Well, tap back into the rhythm of creation and find a spirit of restfulness by listening to the words of Jesus. Let's get away for a little while. Let's go rest a while, right? And I love what one writer said of this story, that the translation here today that Jesus is trying to get across to these guys might read something along the lines of this: that what you really need isn't a beer. What you really need isn't a night on the town. What you really need isn't a night with Netflix. What you really need is time alone with me. But to do that, I would suggest to you, we've got to get away from all the noise and all the people and insert that secluded place and time of rest, which sounds nice, but it's a whole lot easier said than done in the stories. We read that people saw them going and they ran on ahead of them. And as they come ashore, there's this huge crowd of people. And so Jesus begins teaching them. And the Bible says it was late in the day. And this part is equally important, I think, to everything we're talking about, because in reality, most especially if you have kids, what sounds nice and sounds good is sometimes impossible. Why? Well, because stuff happens. People happen. Kids happen. This is where we find the story of the feeding of the 5,000. So, yeah, I'd say in this case, people happen, life happened. And then after all that, Jesus sends his guys on ahead in the boat. And where does he go? Why doesn't he get in the boat with them? Well, Mark 6 and verse 46 says, after bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. You know, just as we saw with God last week, God rested. Just through two of the many stories we could have looked at, we see this rhythm to Jesus' go, go, go lifestyle where he finds rest and a reconnection with God, finding the peace, finding the quiet amongst the chaos, making it a priority, not just to do it, but because it injects life and strength and power back into us, as well as builds that relationship with God. You see, for your 44 today, let me leave you with something I'm working on this year. I told you about last week some of Megan and I's conversation as it relates to that word Sabbath. But each year, rather than set a whole bunch of resolutions, I've gotten in the habit of just picking one word, and one word be that word that I'm going to focus on and I'm going to try to work on each year. And this year, my word is that Greek word eremos, or maybe a better translation might just be quiet. And I want to be a whole lot better about finding my Sabbath or finding my quiet or my rest or whatever else you might want to call it on the daily, because I've got this really bad habit in thinking that in my seasons of busyness or when life is hectic and when people are knocking at my door for my time and my energy, that the first thing I get rid of to make space for whatever it is the very piece of this rhythm of creation and this tempo that Jesus teaches us. Instead, this year, I'm resolving to do my best to find my eremos, to find my rest and my quiet each day, to sit with God in the quiet, to pray, to read his word, to think, and in turn, be refreshed and strengthened, knowing that more than anything, that's exactly what I need because God needed it. And Jesus shows us through his example of his life, he needed it too. Thank you guys so much for listening today. Hopefully, this gave you some things to think about and to instill in your life. But I want you to know more than anything, I don't have any of this figured out, but rather, just like you, I'm trying to learn and to grow into a better relationship with God. And if you're out there and you're listening today and your resolution is to get plugged back into a right relationship with God, shoot me a text, send me an email. I would love to be a part of that journey with you and walk alongside that journey with you. Thank you again for listening. I love you guys. And until next week, keep on eating.